this room. You can't even see the floor. What's that growing over in the corner? Clean your room! Clean your room!
Hello, my friends, and welcome to the second episode of Clean Your Room, a podcast. I'm your host, Joseph Russitano, also go by Joey Hollywood, and I noticed last month's episode was a little on the boring side. My thought process when making it was like, oh, I'll just lean back and be casual and just casually talk about it. It'll be like a chill thing. And I think that might have been a good idea. I think that perhaps I'm not the best person for that idea because it came out a little boring. So this time I'm sitting up straight and I'm going to try to be a lot more engaging in this episode. So without further ado, let's talk about some movies and TV shows. Right off the bat, let's talk about something I've been watching for the past 4 years, I think. I've been watching Psych on Peacock. I got Peacock for free for a couple of years, and there wasn't a whole lot on there that I wanted to watch. But Psych was a show that I caught episodes here and there back when it was on TV. And I was like, you know what? I'd like to see this show from beginning to end. Off the bat, it starts off as a very interesting procedural show. It's based, like a lot of these shows are, off Sherlock Holmes. You got your Watson character, and it's got like a slight, askew, kind of silly edge to it. And as the show goes on, it gets more and more absurd. They say the term Flanderization, I think is what it's called, when, Ned Flanders was a layered character, and then he just became the religious idiot as The Simpsons went on. That's Psych. All these characters just get progressively dumber as the show goes on. But I don't really feel like it makes the show worse or anything. In fact, as weird as it gets near the end, I kind of appreciate it. Like, Lassiter starts off as just being a uptight, kind of a gun nut. And by the end of the show, he is a psychopath. He's a complete psychopath. I don't know. It was interesting to see something like that. I kind of miss television that was just like one and done. You didn't have to watch a whole series for. I don't know. It was fun to revisit something like that. I might revisit Monk too. That was the other show that was on around the same time. I think the only thing I didn't like about Psych was the love interest. Jules and Sean have nothing in common. They don't seem to make each other better. Throughout the entire run of the show, they seem almost like foils for one another. It's a will they won't they that I just hope they won't they the whole time. And it's funny too because Sean has chemistry with almost every single woman on the show except for Jules, which is bizarre because apparently they dated in real life. But I remember there's one point where Gus gets a girlfriend who has a kid, and Sean had more chemistry with Gus's girlfriend than he had with his own. It was so bizarre. And just from a writing standpoint, you think Sean would have more character options by him having to raise a kid suddenly, because he is so childish himself. That seems like it would be a very alluring thing to do for the writing team. But instead, they just kept pairing him with Jules, a character he has no chemistry with. You know who I wish Sean got with? And she's only in one episode, but there was so much chemistry and so much potential in that one episode that the rest of the series felt like a misstep. There's a Christmas episode where Gus's sister visits, and it's revealed that Sean and Gus's sister Joy had a secret relationship. And these two had so much chemistry, they bounced off each other super well. They seemed to be a positive influence on each other's lives, despite the fact that they kept saying it was a negative influence. We never saw that, we just saw the positives. And I kind of wish that we got that relationship to grow, because she was a lawyer that could have opened up avenues for more mysteries. She was genuinely just a fun actress. And I wish we got more of that. Instead, we got Jules, who's made it into the movies. I've seen 2 of the 3 movies so far, and they're okay. I think there's only one episode with Jules where we actually see them in a functional relationship, and the rest of the time they're lying to each other. They just don't seem compatible at all. It's my least favorite thing about the show. But the mysteries are fun. I love Sean and Gus's interactions. When you hear that it's mostly ad lib, it makes sense. These feel like 2 friends that just play off each other constantly. Despite me not liking Jules and going on that big big tirade about how much I don't like Jules. I think this show is very much worth watching. It's a lot of fun. It's one of the best like murder mystery procedurals out there. I mean, like the funny ones. It almost feels like Scrubs, but a murder mystery. I don't know. I just had a lot of fun with it, and it got me thinking about streaming and terrestrial television. I don't really watch live TV anymore. It's a rarity when I do. I kind of miss it because I don't like being the curator of my own content, if that makes any sense. I kind of miss the idea of like coming home from school, or I guess now work, and just throwing on the TV and just letting the fate decide whatever I watch. You know, it's like, okay, well, what's on? Okay, MASH is on. I'm going to watch MASH for an hour. I miss, commercials coming up and me getting up to go, make some food or something, and then like rushing back. Those memories are so, I have a lot of fondness for them. And I feel like you can't put the toothpaste back in the tube, because I've tried watching terrestrial television recently. And it's not the same. Like I came home from work one day and I threw on MeTV, and In the Heat of the Night was on, which I haven't seen in a million years. I probably saw In the Heat of the Night last time I saw Matlock, which was like probably 2,000 years ago. It couldn't hold my attention the way it used to. I'm not sure if it's because I'm older or if it's just because I've been spoiled by streaming. Like even streaming with ads feels a lot more like convenient, and I don't know. It's weird. And I also have noticed that like there seems to be less cultural touchstones nowadays. I remember there would be like something on TV and everyone would be talking about it the next day. And now everyone's talking about various medias, but it's all like fragmented in a way I've never seen in my lifetime until recently. And it's odd. Do I think it's better? I don't know. I mean, there's so many streaming services now, you might as well have cable. But I kind of miss that ability to just throw something on, Like I haven't watched Seinfeld in years, and I used to watch Seinfeld at least like once a week. Is this a bad thing, or is this, society moving forward? I know when radio was becoming obsolete and television was becoming the main thing, there were a lot of people that were upset that no one was gathering around the radio and spending time together. They were just, huddled together around a glowing box, and people were complaining about that. So is this just the new old man yelling at clouds scenario? I don't know. I guess time will tell. But speaking of gathering around a glowing box, let's talk about Late Night with the Devil. I was super excited about this movie. I kind of went into it blind, which I think might have been a mistake, but I wanted to love this movie. I loved the premise of a late night talk show where something bad happened and it was caught on live TV. It's such a cool idea. There's a movie called the WNUF Halloween Special, which is a similar premise. It's like a live Halloween special where they're inspecting a haunted house and things go wrong there. But that one's played more for laughs. What's great about the WNUF Halloween Special is the commercials that bookend all the segments of the quote-unquote horror. It's a very funny movie. But I was hoping for something a little bit more played straight, a little bit more serious, and the premise of it being a late night show, it just I was like, man, that works. It's the 70s. That sounds like it works. So I went in blind, and I don't think it worked. I don't think it worked at all. I think one of the biggest problems while trying to sell this movie was the fact that it didn't look like it was from the 70s. It looked like it was shot on HD cameras. And I feel like there was just such an easy way to fix that. You could have ran the footage through VCR, of course. If you didn't want to go through that effort, you could have just recorded the movie at a higher frame rate, like record it at 30, 35 frames per second. That would have maintained that shot on video live illusion. If you wanted to be lazy about it, you could just put a filter on top of that high frame rate footage. And I think it would have worked. It would have sold the illusion a lot better. Yeah, it was very clear to me that it just wasn't working pretty quick. The first time they did behind the scenes footage, I was starting to get like a nervous feeling, because when they went to the behind the scenes footage, it went from like guerrilla style handy cam of like shoving cameras in people's faces while they're having candid conversations where no one would want a camera on them. And I feel like there's a way you could have sold that part of the show. You could have had like, oh, we're going to commercial. Footage cuts to black and white, camera tilts slightly to the side, and it's locked in place. And you could have had those characters have those same conversations, but they're caught on hot mics. They're just slightly in frame because the camera's locked down, And I think it could have. I think you could have sold the effects, but instead it just like, the camera was shaking and they're shoving the camera in their face as they're talking about stuff that I don't want to spoil the movie, but they're talking about stuff that is highly incriminating. So I'm like, this just doesn't work. And then the ending specifically didn't work. I know some people liked the ending, but to me it felt very 2015 Let's Player indie horror game. It felt like like one of those PT clones. And I don't know, man. The ending ruined the movie for me. I will never watch this movie again just because of the ending. If you want to see something like this that I think it works a lot better, Ghost Watch. I think that was from the BBC or Channel 4 or whatever. I think that's a little bit better. WNUF Halloween Special is a lot of fun, but it's not played straight. Yeah, man, I really wanted to like this movie, but I just didn't. But recently I did watch the movies I liked. I watched all the Mummy movies, Hammer and Universal. But the old Universal Mummy movies are a lot of fun. The first one I think is genuinely just a good movie. It kind of feels like a remake of Dracula, but with like an Egyptian paint job. And I mean that in the most positive way possible. I think it's probably one of the best looking Universal monster movies from that time period. Boris Karloff is fantastic as the Mummy. You only really see him as like a mummy for a very brief time, but he really like holds that movie together. He's great in that movie. The sequels, unfortunately, they don't stand out enough for me to really like recommend them. I feel like the old Universal monster movies, some series are better than others. Like the Frankenstein movies, they all are pretty awesome. The Dracula movies are very much hit and miss. And this one, I think, like, none of them were miss for me, but none of them were, like, super interesting. The only thing about the Universal Mummy sequels that I really liked is that the later ones all take place in the swamps of Louisiana. I think a mummy in Louisiana is a really fun idea. And some of them have some pretty interesting climaxes. Like, there's one where there's a mummy in a burning building in the swamps of Louisiana. Some of that stuff's fun. I really, really enjoyed watching the Hammer movies, even the bad Hammer movies. But the first one I think the first one's actually great. Christopher Lee, even though he despised playing silent monsters, he does it so well. He has the most presence as the mummy when he's an actual mummy. Not like, I know Boris Karloff was pretty great when he was out of the mummy gear, but Christopher Lee is so like he's scary when he's the mummy. He was also scary when he was Frankenstein's monster too. He just does it so well. And then you got Peter Cushing as the lead in that movie, and it's got like almost like a proto slasher movie element to it. It's a lot of fun. I really like that first Hammer Mummy movie. The sequels are not as good. Most of them are just remakes of the original movie that just aren't as good. But I think the last one, I think it was the last one, was the most interesting because it wasn't a stereotypical mummy movie. It was more like a spirit possessing someone and killing people through the spirit. And it was done through like a jewel. There was like a jewel where it had a constellation in the jewel, and then like when the sun was, or not the sun, the stars were perfectly aligned. The daughter of like one of the people who disturbed a tomb goes out killing people, and it was, I'm butchering the story on this one, but it was the biggest treat of all those older mummy movies because I really didn't know what to expect. I can't remember what it was called, but I think there was 4. Outside of the original, that was the only sequel that I think I'd ever revisit. But yeah, all this was kind of leading up to a rewatch of the Brendan Fraser mummy movies. I haven't really watched the Brendan Fraser mummy movie in a very long time, but it was a lot of fun revisiting it. It's a lot more horror based than I recall. I remember it being a very action adventure movie, which it is, but the horror scenes in it, I think, are what elevate it beyond, a silly adventure movie. I think that's what really like supplanted it in a lot of people's memories, because you have this fun, Indiana Jones style adventure film, and then you got some scenes of just some true horror. That bug scene terrified me as a child, and as an adult, as bad as the CGI is on those scenes, it's genuinely, the idea of it is so gross and creepy. And you know, I mentioned that the CGI was bad, but it's not nearly as bad as its reputation would insist. In fact, I want to say that a lot of people's criticisms about the CGI in this movie are kind of misplaced. I think they're talking more so about the sequel, Mummy Returns, because this movie, the CGI is not fantastic. It's dated, but it works well enough that it's not distracting. I don't know. You got such fun characters and some really awesome, memorable scenes. Just a really fun adventure film from the late '90s, early 2000s. I'm glad I revisited it. You know, speaking of the sequel, Mummy Returns, yeah, that movie CGI does not fare well at all. It's funny when people defend it, they were like, "Well, at the time it was pretty good." No, I was there at the time. We all thought it was crap. But this one I did watch a million times as a kid because it was, you know, less scary. I didn't watch a lot of horror movies when I was younger. That was something that came later in life. I think it's a pretty smart sequel because it just really widened the audience. More people, I think, saw this movie than the last one. You also had The Rock in it for like 3 seconds, which is bizarre. He's on the cover of the box. The whole movie they're talking about him, and you maybe get like a minute of screen time with him. And then there's the, you know, the horrible CGI version of him at the end. But I think the pros outweigh the cons. I think there's a lot of great set pieces in this movie, a lot of great action set pieces in this movie. A lot of fun characters. I feel like it builds off the original and expands it even more. I love that the son acts just like the mom, even repeating, you know, comedic moments from the first movie with the son in a way where it doesn't feel like it's just a repeat. It feels like, oh, look, they're connected through these, like, you know, tropes. And I don't know, I think it's just a fun movie. I really enjoyed it. I remember as a kid just being so excited for the third one. I can't wait for the third Mummy movie. And then when it finally came out, I just was so I was so like apathetic towards it. And speaking of which, let's talk about the third Mummy movie. It's bad. It's worse than I remember. Going back and watching the first two, they're better than I recalled. God, it sucks. Just the action in it is so slow. It's also really weird that in the second movie they established that the son takes after the mom, but in the third one he's taking after the dad. Let's not even talk about how the mom's a different actress in it. She just didn't want to be in it. Whatever. Okay, I can move on. I can accept that. But they didn't do anything interesting with the characters. It's such a flat movie. Setting it in Japan was just such a strange choice. I feel like there's something to be mined from a mummy movie set in Japan, and they dropped the ball really hard on it. What they should have done is, if they wanted to switch locations, they should have switched it to Mexico. I think that would have had more opportunity. You could have had Aztec mummies. There was more stuff to be mined from it. But honestly, what they should have done, they shouldn't have switched to another culture. That's what you do with the fourth movie. What they should have done is they should have built off the last one. Make the Scorpion King the villain. You know? You don't want to do Imhotep anymore? Fine. You have a new villain set up in that second movie. Have the Scorpion King be the villain. That movie is just the definition of dropping the ball. It's horrible. But not as horrible as the Scorpion King movies. Yeah, because I watched all 5 of those. I will tell you, those movies are horrendous. They're awful. I was talking about the slow action in The Mummy 3. The action in these Scorpion King movies is like comatose. It is awful. I think, honestly, they're the worst movies I ever saw. And I like watching bad movies. I like the Anaconda and Lake Placid movies. They're like guilty pleasures for me. So I saw they're from the same company, Universal. I'm like, oh, well, they're probably going to be like of the same quality. No, man. They're like, you know, the Xena and Hercules Legendary Journey, you know, the pilots for the Hercules Legendary Journeys. It's like, they're like those movies, but without any charm or tongue-in-cheek. They're awful. They're so bad. And the worst part is, They don't even work as prequels because the Scorpion King we see in these 5 movies is nothing like the Scorpion King we see in The Mummy Returns. And they try to sprinkle in some like, oh, here's the Book of the Dead or the Book of Life or whatever. I can't remember which movie it is because these movies all suck and they blur together for me. But it doesn't really feel like you're adding anything to the lore, really. It's like, oh, there's that thing. One of them shot in Asia, and I think that was the worst one. I think Billy Zane's in that. It's the worst one, but Billy Zane is the best thing about all 5 of these movies. Because it's very clear he understands he is in garbage, and I think he's drunk the whole time. He's the funnest part in this. I can't remember which one it is. I think the best movie was the 5th one. The one with The Rock sucked too. I can't remember anything that happened in that movie. I watched them, I guess technically out of release order. I watched them in chronological order, so I watched The Scorpion King 2 first. I don't really feel like it made a difference because they just creatively reset the character in every single one. And he's played by a different actor in every single one. Well, there's one actor plays him twice, but he was probably the worst of all these actors too. The final actor, I feel like, was probably one of the better ones because he had that Kevin Sorbo, I ain't looking for no trouble element to him that they were like trying to hammer in with these other movies, and it just didn't work. The Rock was terrible as the Scorpion King. I'm just gonna say it. I genuinely regret watching these. and it was funny too because I picked up the box set for the Scorpion King for $5, and I was like, wow, that's like $1 a movie. And then after I watched them, I was like, yeah, that's why this was so freaking cheap. Because they're terrible. And I'm not sure if it's because I watched 5 terrible Scorpion King movies, but I watched the 2017 Mummy movie with Tom Cruise, and it was not as bad as I thought it was going to be. Don't get me wrong, it's not good, but there was a lot of stuff stacked against it going in. First of all, it was written and directed by Alex Kurtzman, who I just hate. I think he's just the biggest hack in Hollywood. I'll get into that more in a moment. God, I was just expecting it to be horrible because just the reputation around it. But I have to say, the horror scenes in it are pretty good. When it is just a straight horror movie, I think it's decently effective. And I really like the mummy herself in it. I wish that we had some of the elements of this movie just in a better movie, because I was like, oh, this might have worked. And it was also supposed to be the start of a cinematic universe. They have an extended scene with Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde that feels like it's something straight from the Sci-Fi Channel. It's so bad. And of course, there's elements of it that feel like plagiarism because it's Alex Kurtzman. Alex Kurtzman has had an entire career of being accused of plagiarism, so it shouldn't really be all that surprising. But yeah, there's like a whole subplot in this movie that is directly ripped off from American Werewolf in London. You know, they have the friend of their main character, you know, appearing in mirrors and decaying as the movie goes on, talking to our main character, which is Tom Cruise. Tom Cruise is not fit for this role at all, which is weird because he was actually supposed to play Brendan Fraser's character in the original, or not the original, the last remake of The Mummy. And he's just so miscast here. He has no chemistry with his best bud. It just doesn't work. So much of this movie just doesn't work. And I lay 80% of the blame on Alex Kurtzman. He is just such a hack. Let's talk about Alex Kurtzman for a minute. We're talking about a man who has just failed upward his entire career. You know, he was in charge of the Spider-Man cinematic universe, and he killed that off with one movie. He did Spider-Man, The Amazing Spider-Man 2, and they're like, all right, let's start over. And then he kills the Dark Universe with The Mummy with one movie. They do one movie, and they're like, all right, scrap that. And then after that, they give him Star Trek. They give him the Star Trek cinematic universe. And this is after he, in part, bombed the Star Trek on cinema screens, too. Because, like, he did the second one, and because of the negative reception of that movie, the third one nobody saw. And the third one was probably the only good Kelvin Universe Star Trek movie. And even that kind of sucked in the third act. But God, and he always has, like, the same, like, awful writing tropes. I don't know what it is with Alex Kurtzman and magic blood. He had magic blood in Spider-Man 2, Amazing Spider-Man 2. He had magic blood in Star Trek Into Darkness. And I've heard this, and I don't know if it's true because I don't watch any of these movies, but I also heard that he introduced magic blood in one of the Transformers movies. And his whole career he's been accused of ripping off video games. If you watch Star Trek Picard, it's like ripped off Mass Effect like you wouldn't believe. Modern Star Trek under Alex Kurtzman is just like plagiarism from whatever was popular on television 5 years before. Oh, Westworld's popular? 5 years from now, Alex Kurtzman is gonna rip that off on Star Trek. Oh, Game of Thrones was popular 5 years ago. We're gonna make Star Trek Discovery heavily inspired by it. The man is just awful. I don't understand how he has maintained control over Star Trek. The man seems like a detriment to it. I read somewhere that Star Trek Discovery was supposed to have 6 seasons with the option of a 7th. It got canceled at season 5, and the last time I watched Star Trek Discovery was season 3, and that felt like a finale. And it was horrible. Some of the worst writing ever. And you can always tell it's him writing something too, because he always has these like grand platitudes that mean absolutely nothing. And this goes like everything he's ever written. And he's ruined Star Trek. Star Trek used to be a very intellectual property. He doesn't like any of the restraints. He's openly admitted this. He doesn't like the restraints Star Trek has in writing, which is the reason why Star Trek has lasted so long. It's not like everything else on television, and Alex Kurtzman is devoted his entire career to making Star Trek like everything else. So when you make it like everything else, there's no reason to freaking watch it now. You know, like, was it Star Trek Strange New Worlds has a musical episode as if this is Buffy? The only thing I've heard has been good from him is the 3rd season of Picard. And I haven't watched it because the first 2 seasons were just the most offensive things I've ever consumed. They were awful. Horrendous. Star Trek died under Alex Kurtzman. It just doesn't know it yet. But you know what the best Star Trek has been since the cancellation of DS9? The Orville, surprisingly. It came out the same year as Star Trek Discovery. And at the time, when I would watch Star Trek Discovery and the Orville, I would like sit back and go, that was good. It didn't really scratch that Star Trek itch. It just makes me want to watch Star Trek. Because when the Orville first came out, it was just Star Trek with dick and fart jokes. And I was like, okay, this is fine. I don't really find Seth MacFarlane's humor, that funny. It's just who I am. I don't know. It just doesn't really connect with me. But as the Orville went on, it got better and better and better, where it didn't feel like a Star Trek parody anymore. It just felt like something that could stand shoulder to shoulder with Star Trek. The 3rd season of the Orville, called New Horizons, is probably some of the best science fiction I've seen on television in a long time. It's the best like one and done sci-fi stories I've seen since probably the 90s or early 2000s. They handled so many topics with maturity and intelligence in a show that started off as just Star Trek with dick and fart jokes. It really blew me away. And they actually adapted one episode that couldn't be filmed due to the coronavirus. They adapted one episode into a novel, which I read, and it was called Sympathy for the Devil. And the premise of it was there was a guy who was trapped in basically a holodeck his entire life, but it was set for World War II. And this baby gets raised in a holodeck by the Nazis, and he grows up to be just an evil genocidal maniac. And then one day, the crew of the Orville stumble across this holodeck, and they turn it off, and he's like, what's going on? And it's like, okay, so what do we do with this guy? He's a genocidal maniac. He killed thousands of Jews, but they weren't real. And it's just this interesting moral quandary of like, what do you do with this man? It doesn't hold your hand. It doesn't give you an easy answer. It was great. I wish this got adapted. And I feel it's very reflective of what the 3rd season of The Orville became. I really want there to be a 4th season of this show, but if it ends with season 3, New Horizons, I feel like we got some amazing television from it. I think The Orville really shows that who should have been in charge of Star Trek on television should not have been Alex Kurtzman. It should have been the guy who made Family Guy. Let's move on from television and talk about movies for a little bit. When I was a kid, I really liked Jurassic Park. It was one of my favorite movies. I watched it a million times. I watched Jurassic Park so many times that I think I knew all the dialogue as a kid. As an adult, I think I have kind of a newfound appreciation for it. I feel like I understand it a little bit more as an adult. As a kid, I was just like, yeah, dinosaurs. As an adult, I really like the technical aspects of it a lot more. People always hold it up in such high regard because look how the CGI works in this movie, and I think people who use Jurassic Park as an example of good CGI are kind of missing the point. I think they're articulating stuff they've heard from other media critics out there. I don't think they really get it. They're like, oh, the CGI was good in this. And it was like, well, it understood its limitations at the time. I think CGI right now does not try to sell you on the effect anymore. I think it's just a means to an end. I think back then they were trying to sell the effect. And the way they sold that effect back then was not just CGI. It was a plethora of effects. You have force perspective, you have CGI, you have animatronics, you have puppets. There was all sorts of things, and you're constantly seeing a different effect. So most of the time, they all work. They all are sold to you. And I really wish the later Jurassic Park movies kept this element. I think it would have elevated them. But I really like it, and it's not just for the effects. I love the characters in this movie. I love Ian Malcolm. I love Sam Neill as Dr. Grant. Everyone just kind of works in this movie. As a kid, I used to wonder like why they never said the lawyer's name, and they do. I found this out recently. They do say the lawyer's name, but it's like an hour into the movie. They find like a dead body, and he goes, "Oh, I think this is Gennaro." And as a kid, I didn't know what that meant. It wasn't until I read the book that I was like, oh, Gennaro's the lawyer that they never say the name of until after he's dead. But yeah, as a kid, I was obsessed with Jurassic Park. I actually remember when The Lost World Jurassic Park came out on VHS. I was so excited for it. My neighbor was kind of a rich kid, and his mom worked for Blockbuster. She was like the regional manager of Blockbuster or something like that. And he got The Lost World Jurassic Park before it came out. And I remember me and him, we had a bunch of Jurassic Park toys. And I went over to his house, and in his bedroom, which was like way bigger than mine, we watched the Jurassic Park movie. And as a kid, I loved it. I was like, this is the greatest movie ever. And I remember it scared me too. I don't know how old I was. Maybe I was too old to be scared by it. But I remember I was supposed to spend the night, and after the movie I was like, I gotta go home. I'm too scared. As an adult though, I think it could have been a perfect Jurassic Park sequel. It just has a couple of problems that you just can't overlook. The main problem I think I have with it is the entirety of the third act. It's a fun scene where the T-Rex is like raging in LA, but narratively it just doesn't work. And then also how it gets to LA has always been a source of frustration for me as a kid, because it just never really made sense. I was like, why is everyone dead on that boat? And I found out later on that there's a scene in the script where velociraptors get on the boat and kill everybody. And I guess they like fall off the boat or something. I don't know. But it's not that that's a deleted scene. It's just a scene they never filmed. And it's such a glaring oversight. It genuinely ruins the movie. I think that whole third act grinds that movie to a halt, and it just feels like something else. It doesn't work. The timetables don't really match up. It's very odd, the last act of that movie. But I think the first two acts are solid. I think genuinely it's probably the best Jurassic Park sequel. It just has a disappointing ending. Jurassic Park III was the first Jurassic Park movie I ever saw in theaters, and I was so excited for it. You know, as a kid, I didn't understand that Steven Spielberg wasn't directing anymore. I think it was Joe Johnston who directed it. Maybe Joel Johnson. I don't know. It was the guy who directed the Wolfman remake, whatever his name is. And I remember being really, really excited for it. And as the movie was going on, even as a kid, I was like, this is not great. But it is a fun monster movie. Like, if you just want a monster movie, Jurassic Park III is, like, pretty decent. Even as a little kid, I noticed that the movie just looked different. That entire movie is shot on sets, where the Lost World Jurassic Park was shot up in the Sequoia Mountains. And I gotta tell you, the sequoia trees are beautiful and added a lot of character to that movie. Filming on sets for Jurassic Park III made the movie less interesting visually. And I understand why they decided to shoot on sets. It makes the puppets easier to manage. I get that. But I feel like they lost a little something by switching to just shooting exclusively on sets. But it also has a lot of fun set pieces in that movie. I think the main problem I have with Jurassic Park 3 is also the third act. It doesn't have one. It just ends. It's really abrupt. I remember in the theater we're like, "Oh, it's over." It was like one of the earliest memories I have of seeing a movie, of realizing a movie was not as great as I had hoped. Was Jurassic Park 3 when the movie just ends and the military shows up and it's like, oh, okay. And I've heard this and I don't know if it's true, but I heard the reason why the movie just randomly ends is because they were shooting the movie without a script and they just ran out of money. I've heard that. I don't know if it's true. I might be spreading fake news, but if it is fake news, it's believable fake news because the ending just comes out of nowhere. I do like the movie, I think, but I can't say it's great. I think it's better than all three of the Jurassic World's movies. I'll say that. Speaking of Jurassic World, let's talk about it. What an empty movie. There's a couple fun moments. I particularly like the scene where the aide that's supposed to be helping the kids just gets attacked by every single dinosaur in existence for no reason. It's such a mean-spirited scene, but it's one of the highlights of the movie. One of the problems with it that I have is that it has just got too much CGI in it. I want to say I'm over it because that's just the way movies look now. But especially at the time when I first saw it, I was like, "Oh wow, this is just a lot of CGI. I don't believe anything that's happening. I don't believe any of this theme park really exists." It just didn't work. None of the characters are really all that fun either. I don't hate Chris Pratt. I know a lot of people really hate Chris Pratt. A lot of people seem to think hating Chris Pratt is like a personality trait. I'm not one of those people. I think when he works, and when he doesn't, he doesn't. And he doesn't work in this movie. It really drags it down because he just feels too much like a Marvel character. He's always joking, and I'd like a little bit of seriousness in these movies, please. I beg you. And I just don't get it from him. This just felt like the most subpar of subpar remakes, and it's somehow a sequel. I will say what surprised me was that I actually liked Jurassic World Fallen Kingdom. Not because it was a good movie or anything. No, it was far from it. It was not a good movie. And I was a little nervous going in because the Jurassic World just felt like a subpar remake of Jurassic Park. And when Fallen Kingdom started, it just felt like a subpar remake of The Lost World. So I was like, oh great, here we go. And the second half of the movie turns into a haunted house movie, but instead of ghosts, it had dinosaurs, and I was incredibly charmed by that. I thought it was a lot of fun. And I guess the scene where all the dinosaurs die on the island is kind of fun too, but I just, that first half just felt too similar to The Lost World, so I didn't really appreciate it the one time I saw the movie. But the second half, at least it felt fresh. You know, I guess it's not all that fresh. I think one of the Carnosaur sequels did something similar. Maybe I should talk about Carnosaurs at some point. Yeah, I don't know. I liked the second half of that movie. I know it's like considered like the worst of the three. I disagree. I think Jurassic World Dominion is the worst sequel, but I'll get into that in a moment. But yeah, I liked this one. I liked the inclusion of the little girl that's like half dinosaur. I don't know. It was kind of fun for what it was. I have no urge to rewatch it, but of the three Jurassic World movies, it was the one I hated the least. And let's get into the worst Jurassic Park movie, Jurassic World Dominion. First of all, this was the worst theater experience I've had in a while up to that point. Not because of the audience, because of just the movie itself. So I watched it as a double feature with the original Jurassic Park, which I thought was going to be a really fun experience. But the first Jurassic Park is genuinely a good movie. So like the letdown was like a plummet. It was awful going from Jurassic Park to Jurassic World 3. Just a fantastic movie to just a genuinely horrible movie. All these characters that we've had these past 3 movies, they all suck. And the worst thing about it is they also brought back the old beloved characters from the previous trilogy, and they sucked too. They acted like characters. They didn't act like they're characters. They acted like people who saw their characters in a movie and were doing an impression of them. It was really weird. And like Alan Grant, like his character apparently just stopped progressing after the first one. He just seems like he's just never grown as a person. All of them really, actually. And then it was also like a weird bioterrorism bug movie with dinosaur scenes. The movie was trying to be way too much all at once, and it was so boring. You know what the best part of seeing Jurassic World Dominion in the theaters was? It wasn't anything in the movie. It was the part where I snuck out my Western bacon cheeseburger that I snuck in and took a bite. That was the best part of that movie. That movie just sucks. Things happen for no reason. They go to Italy and have a chase scene in Italy just so they can have a chase scene in Italy. It doesn't really progress the plot in any way. You could have cut that scene out entirely, just add the plane scene from before and stitch it to the plane scene after, and you would have cut like 30 minutes out of the movie. And it would have moved so much better. The pacing in that movie sucks so bad. I got that movie for free on 4K. Someone just gave it to me, and I haven't watched it. Let's move on from that to something a little bit more stranger. Has anyone seen the movie Srunken Heads? It's a full moon movie, and I think it is the weirdest movie I've ever seen. It is bizarre. I forget the actress in it, but she plays this butch gangster who's like, I think she's like running a drug trade or something in this town, and these kids get kind of like swept up into it. They get like these children get massacred at the beginning of the movie. They just get completely blown away. These literal children, right? And then a voodoo priest like cuts off their heads and ensmollens them, and that's the word of the day, ensmollens. And the Shrunken Heads go on like a killing spree to get rid of the gang that killed them. It's so bizarre. I might be misremembering some elements of it, but there's like a love story between one of the Shrunken Heads and this like girl, and it really just, the head just wants to cuddle her chest at all times. It's so bizarre. I can't believe this was a movie. And it's weird because it looks like a real movie in comparison to other like full moon feature stuff. It's so weird. The music is so like big and bombastic. It sounds like Danny Elfman music, but I think the music was done by Richard Band. I'm not really sure, but it's sounding like Danny Elfman. You know what? Actually, it sounds like Danny Elfman's music from Army of Darkness. It sounds very similar. If it is Richard Band that did the music for it, it's not surprising because he also ripped off the soundtrack to Psycho when he did Reanimator. So I don't know, maybe spreading fake news again, but yeah, just the strangest movie. If you want the weirdest movie experience, watch this movie. It'll blow your mind. It is so weird. I'm not saying it's good. I'm not saying it's bad. I'm saying it's weird. It's worth at least one watch, in my opinion. But I want to talk about like a full moon movie that I think is actually really, really good. I really like the first Subspecies movie. I love this movie. I watch it once a year. Not like a planned thing. It's just like once a year I just get in the mood to watch Subspecies. I watch them all. And it's funny too because the pacing and the aesthetic of the movie looks a lot older than the movie really, really is. The movie came out in, I think, 1990, and it looks like it came out in the early 80s, maybe even the late 70s. And it's paced like one of those movies, too. Agnes Sim gets, like, top billing, and he's only in, like, one scene in the beginning. The actor who plays Radu the vampire is fantastic. He makes these movies work really well. He's kind of got like a Clear Klaus kind of vibe to him. Just a really inventive movie. I've heard there's a book that's based on the journals from the director whose name I believe is Ted Nikotao. I've heard that he's made a book about making this movie based on his journal. I've heard him say it himself, but I can't find that book anywhere. I'm not sure what he's talking about, but I would love to read it. Apparently, this movie was supposed to take like a month to make, and it took like 3 or something like that. And just very inventive filmmaking. There's so many like interesting stories the directors told about making it. I would really like to learn more about it. I would really like a full feature-length documentary about making these movies. That would just be so interesting. I think it's Full Moon's best movie. I also really like the sequel, Bloodstone, Subspecies II. This one has a new lead actress. Forget her name, but she's actually who I think of when I think of like the protagonists in the Subspecies movies. I don't think of the original girl, which is funny because they introduce a sister in the sequel that looks more like the original girl from the first movie, but for some reason they got her playing the sister, and the girl playing the character from the first movie looks nothing like her. It's a good sequel. This one, it builds off the last one. It feels, the first 3 movies feel like they could just be one movie, just told in 3 separate parts, which I guess makes sense for this one and the next one because they were shot back to back. But this movie adds a lot to it. Radu has like extended family in this one, and it really starts to build the idea of him trying to groom the main character of this franchise to be a vampire, which is an interesting element. And a lot of that stuff is built upon even more in Bloodlust, Subspecies III. This movie, it's almost jarring how much it builds off the last one. Because the first movie, it does build off. It takes place like I want to say like 3 hours later after the first movie. But there's enough differences between the two that you can go, okay, this is its own kind of story, but Subspecies 2 feels like half a movie, and this feels like the other half of the movie. And so it's a little jarring in that sense, but it's not jarring in a bad way. It's just like, oh, okay, well, here's the rest of the movie. You can watch Subspecies 1 and be satisfied. You can't watch Subspecies 2 and be satisfied. You gotta watch the third one afterward. You know, like the previous movie, it expands this universe in a way that I feel like is interesting. It makes it understandable why there's a spinoff, because it seems like this is a whole functional universe. I feel like you could make novels based on the Subspecies franchise, and they could work decently well. And if you don't like the 4th movie, I feel like 3 ends in a way that's pretty dang satisfying. Let's talk about The Vampire Journals. This is a spin-off of Subspecies. And it is a pretty decent spin-off, I would say, in the sense that it adds to this universe. It makes it feel more fleshed out and interesting. However, it is too slowly paced. And all these Subspecies movies are slowly paced, but this one really, really feels it. I think it's because there's not a lot of location variation, and our main character in it is not super interesting. He's just brooding the whole time. He's ripe with interesting things to be done with him, but he just kind of mopes the whole movie. There's a lot of fun ideas here. I just don't think it works. I think it's betrayed by its budget, which is kind of an odd thing to say because this movie looks like it's a higher budget than it is. And I credit that to Ted Nikotao's directing. I think he was able to get a lot out of what little money he had with this movie. There is some continuity errors between this and the Subspecies franchise, though, like the mainline Subspecies franchise, because they introduce a character named Ash, who, I won't spoil what happens, but there's really not a way he can be in this movie and Subspecies 4 at the same time. Also, there's an actor in this who has a very distinct look, and he's in the next movie. He's in Subspecies 4, but he's playing a radically different character, but is dressed and has a performance that is very, very similar. So it's very odd. It has a very odd placement in the franchise. If you were having a Subspecies marathon, I would definitely say watch this one before Subspecies 4, but you don't really need to see this movie. And speaking of Subspecies 4, let's talk about Bloodstorm, Subspecies 4. They alien 3 the supporting cast, like right at the beginning. Like all these characters that you've kind of gotten to know over the past like 2 movies particularly kill them off camera in a car accident. They apparently drive off at the end of Subspecies 3 and instantly turn their car over and die. And I think that's the main reason why people hate Subspecies 4. This is the only movie that has a pretty like fast-paced presence in the entire Subspecies franchise, because all these movies are super slow except for Subspecies 4. This one it almost has action movie pacing. Unlike the other Subspecies movies, this one really showcases its low budget. The old Subspecies movies feel like grander than they are, and this one really does feel like a low budget movie, especially when you're in like the mad science lab. Those scenes are just horrible. There are elements of it that are kind of boring despite the faster pace, and then of course you have characters from vampire journals that really shouldn't be there as far as continuity goes. There's like one actor who's like, he's playing essentially the same character, but he's playing a different character. It's very odd. It's actually funny. I remember seeing an interview with Charles Band and Ted Nicotero. I hope I'm saying his name right. Nicotero? No, I've been saying it wrong this whole time. I'm not going back and fixing that. Nicotero? That's, God. What was his name? It's Ted something. Oh, whatever. I've been saying it wrong this whole time. I'll probably just get a bunch of comments complaining about that. Oops. But yeah, I saw an interview with the director and the producer, whose names I won't say because I've been saying them wrong this whole time. And Charles Band says, yeah, people think Vampire Journals is a spin-off. I don't know where they get that idea from. And then the director goes, it's because it is a spin-off. I wrote it as a spin-off. And then Charles Band just talks over and goes, yeah, it's a dumb idea. I don't know why they think that. It was really funny. I don't hate this movie. I like it. I don't skip it. I know some people do. I don't. I think it's fun. I liked it more than the 5th one, I'll be honest. And speaking of which, let's talk about Subspecies V, Blood Rise. I've been excited about this movie for a long time. I didn't think it was ever going to come out, honestly. It took like 20 years for it to be made, which is just mind-blowing, honestly, that something like this could be made. And it's probably one of the best-looking full moon movies in probably 20 years. It's unfortunately very slowly paced. It also brings back characters from the vampire journals, which is kind of cool. Unfortunately, this movie for me doesn't have a lot of rewatch value. I would say I liked it. I liked that it was made more than anything else. I liked that the movie was made. But it doesn't have the same rewatchability that the other 4 or 5 movies do for me. I do think that when I do my yearly Subspecies binge, I will include this one because why not? You know, it's so cool that they got the cast back. There's a lot of ideas I like in this. I wish the Subspecies movies could get the budgeting that I think they deserve. You know, but it's cool that Full Moon was able to make this. They were able to make it on location, which is really impressive. And I like that we got these actors back. These actors really sell this movie. I really, really like things about this movie. It's just not my favorite of the franchise. It's my least favorite of the franchise, but I still like it. You know what? I've been on a big Mad Max kick recently. I've rewatched all the Mad Max movies. What an awesome franchise. I love that first Mad Max movie. And it's kind of funny because as a kid it was my least favorite. And now it's like probably my second favorite Mad Max movie. But as a kid I hated it. And I entirely blame that on the fact that I had the world's worst VHS tape of it. My copy of Mad Max was dubbed with American accents. And what made it even worse was it was a widescreen movie that was compressed to full screen. It wasn't pan and scan, it was squished. So the whole movie just looked weird. It was a bad print of the movie. It was almost like those dollar store DVDs with like public domain movies and it's like the worst possible prints. That was the print I had of Mad Max. So after like watching Beyond Thunderdome and The Road Warrior, I went to that and it was awful. It was genuinely just terrible. And it kind of ruined the movie for me for many, many years. It wasn't until I got it on DVD where I started to have a new appreciation for it. And over the years, it's grown to be, I like it. I would say it's my second favorite of all 5 movies. The opening scene, the opening chase scene is probably one of the most impressive and effective chase scenes in all of the entire franchise. It's so effective. It feels so dangerous and raw. Genuinely, just all the action scenes in this movie are kind of awesome. There's one scene, and I can't remember where it's at, but there's a guy, it's a car crash scene, and a motorcycle just smacks this dude straight in the head, and it makes me wince every single time. I think the setting of the first Mad Max movie is super interesting because it's not just a post-apocalypse. You get that with the sequels, but this first movie, it's the world on the brink of collapse. People are still trying to hold on to law and order. They're still trying to, and that plays into it. Law and Order is breaking down. One of the guys gets out of jail because no one shows up for the hearing. And it's because no one's showing up because the world's collapsing. And I don't know, it's a really interesting backdrop to tell this very simple revenge story. And it blossomed into what we saw later in The Road Warrior and Beyond Thunderdome. And then of course the more recent films. It was the inspiration for the Saw movies. The last 3 minutes of the movie inspired the Saw movies. We have Mad Max to thank for Saw. I also love the poster for the first Mad Max. I think it's my favorite poster of the entire series. And it's not even Mad Max on the poster, it's Goose. But yeah, I love that first Mad Max movie. A lot of people say it's boring. I don't feel like it's boring, but I guess I'm an odd duck. I love that first Mad Max movie though. I highly recommend people check it out. Nothing like what came after, but still really good in its own right. I think next to the Evil Dead trilogy, I think Mad Max 2, The Road Warrior, is the movie I watched the most during high school. Man, to this day, it's still my personal favorite of all the Mad Max movies. Even with the awesomeness that came more recently with Fury Road and Furiosa, The Road Warrior just can't be beat for me. It builds off that landscape we saw in the first Mad Max movie, a world on the brink of collapse, and then we see the world in full collapse. And it doesn't pull any punches with it, too. It is just a horrid, horrid place. And while Mad Max himself does not have as many lines as he did in the first movie, he still feels like a fleshed out character. And I think in part that's due to Mel Gibson's performance. I think he brings a lot to the role. A lot of people lately have just been saying if you say anything negative about Tom Hardy's performance, a lot of people will be like, oh yeah, because Mel Gibson brought so much to the role. And I think he did. I don't know. Maybe I'm just talking out of my butt here. I think he brought a lot to that role. I think he kind of added to what could have been just an empty character. The story's incredibly simple. And I think honestly that's the reason why these movies are so successful. They're just big excuses for action set pieces. And this one's got a great action set piece at the end. One of the best car sequences in the franchise. I still think that opening scene with the Knight Rider is the best chase scene in the whole franchise. But man, this one's awesome. And it's I think it's 13 minutes long, and it's never boring. And like I said before, I feel like Max has grown from that character that we saw him in the first one. We see him as a normal guy who's seeing the world going crazy around him. And he's worried that he's going to be part of that craziness. He's going to go mad. And when his family is murdered in front of his eyes, he does go mad and he starts hunting them down. And I think you see a Max in this movie that's still trying to hold on to his humanity a little bit. And of course, his intentions behind helping the people at the very end of the movie are left ambiguous. But I think that this movie was a further step for him as a character. And I love the ending of the movie, too, where he says, Max lives only in my memories. Or something to that effect. It's just such a great way to end the movie. Honestly, if the Mad Max movie stopped there, I think it would have been fine. It would have been we got 2 great movies. But of course, I probably would never have saw them if it wasn't for the third one. Mad Max Beyond Thunderdome was the first Mad Max movie I ever saw. It was my favorite as a kid and is my least favorite as an adult. Pretty quickly, Road Warrior became my favorite, but as a kid, the opening was so cool to me. Even as an adult, I loved the first half of Beyond Thunderdome. Bartertown is such a cool concept. Visually, it's so interesting. And then we get to the second half of the movie where it turns into Peter Pan. A lot of people I've talked to have argued with me about this. They're like, oh yeah, but the second half has so much world building. And what is the world building? Well, nukes were dropped. Okay, we knew that with the second film. What is being added here? Not much. Not much is being added to the story here. Captain Walker stuff is interesting. Here's my problem with saying that the little kid stuff is great because of world building. We have 2 minutes of world building in essentially a 40-minute sequence. Yeah, the world building was cool for the 2 minutes that we saw it, but the rest of it, man, the whole movie just stops for this. And then when we get back to Bartertown, it feels like a 90s kids movie with the kids running around. All the threat is gone. Even the end chase scene is really goofy. I don't know. I don't hate the movie, but it is my least favorite Mad Max movie, which is funny because it was the first one I saw, and typically I'm a little when it's the first thing I saw, I'm really nostalgic for it. But this is the Mad Max movie I watched the least. Unfortunately, I feel like I said previously that I feel Mel Gibson brought a lot to the role in The Road Warrior. I don't feel like he brings a lot here. He just, I think he's like in full star power mode here, and he just feels like Mel Gibson. When Fury Road came out, people were like, "Oh, that's the way Mad Max always is. He's always just stumbling into other people's stories." I feel like Beyond Thunderdome was the first movie to truly do that. I don't think The Road Warrior counts, my personal opinion. I still feel like it builds off the last one, but Beyond Thunderdome is the first one of the franchise where I really feel like he is just a vessel to tell other people's stories. And that's disappointing because I really feel what they should have done is they should have brought the character full circle. This was supposed to be some sort of redemption arc for him. I don't think that worked. I think what they should have done was they should have opened up the movie with Mad Max in a biker gang similar to the one that killed his family, and have it be like him almost hitting that path of darkness and then pulling away at the last minute. And you could have had a lot of excuses for great action scenes because of that. That's my personal opinion. I mean, that was like 30, 40 years ago, so like, what do I care? You know, it didn't happen, but that's what I wish happened. But, you know, if we didn't get Beyond Thunderdome, we wouldn't have gotten Fury Road. I remember the time between Beyond Thunderdome and Fury Road. I really, really just wanted another Mad Max movie. I was like, man, why can't they just make another one? So the closest thing we had, besides like all the Italian ripoffs, which at the time I couldn't have seen, in between that time, I think the only thing we had that was even remotely like Mad Max was WaterWorld. I have not seen WaterWorld since the 90s. I recently watched it, and I remember loving it as a kid. I remember being really taken up by the concept of it. I thought it was a really cool concept. I remember the villain being really cool. I remember I had Kevin Costner in it, who at the time I remember liking Kevin Costner a lot. I don't watch his movies as much anymore as an adult. But I remember really, really liking this movie. And I was like, you know what? I should watch that again. And I looked up online and I found out there was like 3 different cuts of it. So I was like, okay, what's the best cut of it? And everyone on the internet was saying, oh, the Ulysses cut. That's the cut you should watch. So I bought it, and it was kind of expensive because it was out of print, the Ulysses cut. And I watched it, and it was 3 hours long. And I think I hated it. Kevin Costner is so unlikable in that movie. The only thing that really makes the movie worth watching is the spectacle and Dennis Hopper. He's great as the villain. He's always great as the villain. But man, it is just too long. There's not enough substance in it for it to be 3 hours long. I'm really interested in revisiting the 2-hour theatrical cut, but man, that experience watching it, I think it's going to be a while before I watch the theatrical cut, which I have now because I went out and bought that special edition that came with the Ulysses version, which I don't think I'll ever watch again. One thing I really liked about the Ulysses cut was the ending, which is the ending I remember watching it on television, but apparently that's not in the theatrical cut. And that's the reveal that the land they find in the movie is like Mount Everest, I think. I remember hearing somewhere that if all of the polar ice caps melted, water would only raise 25 feet. But I guess that's the big lie of the movie, that you just have to accept that the world would just be water. Without that, there's no movie. So I guess it doesn't really matter. But yeah, I don't know. I wanted to like it. Maybe one day I'll watch the theatrical cut. But yeah, it could have been the next Mad Max. Unfortunately, it was the first and only WaterWorld. But now that we're beyond Thunderdome, let's talk about Mad Max 4 Fury Road. And I'm a pretty skeptical person by nature. So when Fury Road was announced back in, I think, like 2013, 2014, something like that, I was super skeptical. I was like, okay, Mel Gibson's not coming back. Tom Hardy, the guy who played Shinzon in Star Trek Nemesis, is going to be Mad Max. I can't picture that at all. I think at this point I had not seen Bronson or any of his other movies, but I was like, I'm skeptical. And I remember watching it in the theater and just being completely blown away. I remember loving the movie. I have two problems with it. I feel like there's not enough plot in the movie. I feel like it's a 2-hour action sequence, which a lot of people really like. I like a little bit more substance. I like a little bit more story. And I also really don't like Tom Hardy as Mad Max. Even now that I've seen him in other things and realize he has a lot of range, and I like him more as an actor now, I'm not holding Shinzon against him all these years later. But I don't think he's a good Mad Max. And there's a video of me saying this back in 2015. So this is not like a new opinion. There's video evidence of me saying I don't like him as Mad Max. He seems checked out the entire movie. And recently, a lot of the people who criticized me for having that opinion are now saying the same thing, because there's apparently some sort of book called Blood, Sweat, and Chrome that reveals that Tom Hardy was having panic attacks while filming, and that he was fighting with his co-stars and he was checked out. So I was a prophet back in 2015. I was right. I do think that he has the potential to be better. I heard somewhere that if he got the opportunity again, he would be more professional and whatever. So I would like to see him as Mad Max again. I'd rather see Mel Gibson, but I'd like to see Mad Max The Wasteland with Tom Hardy. I'd like to see that. I don't think it'll ever happen. I'd like to be wrong about that, though. I'd like to not be a prophet about that. I liked Furiosa as a character. She was probably let's be honest, she was the main character of the movie. And I thought she was interesting for the most part. The problem was I wasn't too connected in the stakes of the movie, just because it was so action driven and I wanted more from the characters. I think that the Furiosa movie really helped with that, because I think I appreciate Fury Road more because of the Furiosa prequel, which I would have never have guessed. We might never get Mad Max The Wasteland, which is supposed to be the prequel to Fury Road. That's all about Max protecting a young girl. But I think the closest thing we have to that is the Mad Max 2015 game. It was my introduction to the War Boys and stuff, because I think that came out before Fury Road. I could be wrong. But I was really surprised by how many similarities there were between the game and the movie, because I remember hearing about this game in 2011. I might be wrong there, but I remember still being in high school when I heard about this game. And I've been wanting to play it forever. And it was going to come out in the PlayStation 3. And so I bought a PlayStation 3, and the PS4 came out, and then they're like, oh, the Mad Max game is a PS4 exclusive. And then I never got a PS4. It wasn't until I got a PS5 that I was able to play the Mad Max video game, and I'm playing it right now. I'm not very far into the game. I've just unlocked Jeet's territory, and man, it is so fun. It is scratching that itch for more Mad Max stuff that Furiosa and Fury Road left me with. I want a third Mad Max movie set in this new style, but chances are we're never going to get it, and I think that this game really does fill that void. Who knows? Maybe, Warner Brothers Discovery will be like, you know what? Culturally, we need another Mad Max movie, even if it doesn't make that much money. In a perfect world, I want that to happen, but if you haven't played the Mad Max video game, I highly recommend it. I heard a lot of things about it having bad controls. I disagree. I think it controls pretty well, and I'm bad at video games, and I think it controls pretty well. I'm specifically bad at driving games, and I'm having a lot of fun with this. So, I don't know. I like the world. I'm really early on in the game, so I don't know if it's going to get boring later on, but for right now, I'm having a blast. I can't wait to finish it. But after watching Furiosa, like, I just wanted more, and this game is delivering on that. You know, I think I'll end this up by actually talking about Furiosa. I loved this movie. I only saw the one time in theaters. I actually loved it enough that I was going to see it a second time in theaters, but they pulled it right when I was about to see it. I ended up watching The Watchers instead. Yeah, The Watchers was not great. Furiosa was fantastic. Furiosa really addressed a lot of the problems I had with Fury Road. I didn't like how light on plot Fury Road was. This movie is very heavy on plot. It's so plot driven. And it's funny going into it, I really just didn't know what to expect. I was excited about it just because it was a new George Miller movie. It was a new Mad Max movie. But I wasn't like super excited about it because when it was like, I don't know, it was like Furiosa. Why do we need a prequel to it? It was like, oh, we're going to learn how she lost her arm. I don't really care how she lost her arm. But when I watched the movie, that's not what the movie's about. It's not like what those Star Wars, like those new Disney Star Wars prequels are, where they have to explain like why something's called like the Gonk droid. It wasn't like that. It was like, okay, she loses her arm. This is all happening in the background of a much more interesting story. I loved every second of it. I really enjoy this new spin on the Mad Max world. Coincidentally, it has the same opening as WaterWorld, this movie, but instead of the zooming in on the Earth and it's all surrounded by water, it's just Australia. The whole world is just Australia. But I loved I think Dementus might be the best villain of all 5 Mad Max movies. Heck, I'll throw the video game in there too. I think it's the best villain. At least the best villain since Toe Cutter. Anya Taylor-Joy is fantastic as Furiosa. I think I liked her better than Charlize Theron. I could not stop praising this movie. It is fantastic. I think one of the action sequences gets a little bloated in the middle, specifically the scene with the war pup. That scene I think should have been cut down a little bit. But man, it was 2 hours and like 30 minutes, and it blew by, man. I loved every second of this movie. I actually bought the concessions popcorn bucket for the movie. I was so pumped. I loved it. I loved this movie. I highly recommend it. I like it more than Fury Road, and I think I like Fury Road more because of this movie. I think it added some much needed character development that film was lacking. And it only makes me wish we got Mad Max The Wasteland even more, because Max feels like a hollow character in that movie, partly because of the writing, partly because of Tom Hardy's performance. If George Miller could do what he did to Furiosa to Mad Max in the Wasteland prequel, I think I would hold Fury Road in much higher regard. Well, if you stayed with me this entire time, I appreciate it. Let me know your thoughts on this little experiment down in the comments. After 6 episodes, I might include a Q&A section. And yeah, that's it for now. I'll see you next time. Remember, please be kind and rewind.
Here's my old hat. I think I'll put it